So when I got into college, I called myself an ADA baby because my first year of college was the first year that the ADA was passed. It was 91, 92 time frame. And there was more accessibility at the time, and I was learning how to use interpreters and working through all of that. And I learned quickly when I took my technical classes in college. Most interpreters are not trained in that environment. They're more typically trained in the liberal arts types of settings, everyday language. And when you come to gamma, alpha, molecular chemistry, and biology, the interpreters were lost. They really struggled with keeping up with the information. MSU had a program that was wonderful and very helpful for me. It was called VetWord Bound. And it was a program that the veterinary counseling services provided. And it was a group of women who never said no to me. Not once did they say no. They were as supportive as could be. If they needed interpreters, they found them. If they needed funding to pay for access services, they found it. They were extremely supportive. They had a wonderful can-do attitude, and it was an amazing program for me. I feel very fortunate to have gone through that program. Through that program, I got to know a lot of the faculty at the MSU vet school, and so when I was ready to apply for veterinary school, I knew who the various people were. They were familiar with me a little bit. I think that helped quite a bit, helped me in my application process. I was very fortunate I got into the veterinary program, and that's when really the challenges and my problems with access services began. I had interpreters from my undergraduate coursework follow me into graduate school, and the vocabulary was difficult, but more difficult than that was the speed at which the information was just dumped, and the interpreters had a difficult time following up and keeping up with the information. They didn't want to have the extra task of learning the information outside of the classroom, and despite my struggles and trying to go back and forth and negotiate with the interpreters, I ended up having to fire them because it wasn't working out. And instead I got CART services. Captioning services was an interesting experience for me because with the interpreters, you see, other students and faculty would look at the interpreters and think, oh, that's so cute, you're doing a great job, even though they had no way of assessing what kind of job the interpreter was doing. It just looked good to them and it was pretty and they thought everything was wonderful. But with captioning CART services, I could ask my hearing peers to read the information and tell me if there were any discrepancies with what I got through the CART services, and there were just as many mistakes with captioning services as there were with interpreting services. Information was missing, but at the time it was better than nothing. So what it meant for me is when I completed my coursework and I began my clinical work in school, CART services weren't really going to work out. I can't imagine a CART operator coming onto a farm in a field with manure and cows and animals and all that goes on in a clinical setting, and so I knew that wouldn't work out. So I made the decision to go without access services for the last year and a half of my program. So I had no accommodation, no interpreters, no CART services, nothing at all, and it was really challenging, specifically to learn surgery without any communication. I would write back and forth, and at the time, I was very lucky because it was when we first began using paper drapes over a surgical site. And so I utilized markers. I was famous for bringing my small whiteboard with me wherever I went. And I was lucky that my classmates were very supportive and they would write information on the whiteboard for me. I think several of them still have carpal tunnel because of that experience of all that they had to write. And they were wonderful. I took advantage of all their helpfulness. But for my first surgery ever, I'm standing there and we've got a paper drape over the animal and there's an opening where the surgical site will be. And all around the opening for where this incision site is on the paper drape is writing in this circular motion. And I would just look and follow the writing of my instructor and my peers and figure out what next step I had to do. And it was an amazing storyboard of a surgery, A to Z. And I made a few mistakes and we all got through it, and that was the experience of it all. Again, I got through it, my clinical work, I graduated, and I was so fortunate because upon graduation, I didn't have a difficult time getting a job. Everyone was open to the idea of a deaf veterinarian, and really, what I needed as an accommodation, the only accommodation I needed, was to work through the phones. Some of you may not remember long ago utilizing TTYs and TRS, or text relay service. It was great at the time, but the communication was slow, and the communication between the two people had to be typed, and it was cumbersome and slow. And I was an on-call provider, so I had my pager, which meant that I was tethered to my home all the time. My TTY was at home, so I couldn't go anywhere else, because if I left the house, I wouldn't have access, and no one else had TTYs around me, so I stayed home. Surprisingly, most of the clients I worked with were totally okay with it. And, they would explain what they needed to, tell me about the client. Of all the things they could have complained about, they never complained about having to use the relay service to communicate with me. It was amazing. There have been some really nice changes. Now we've got the video relay service, and everything is free, and it's accessible, and I've got mobile access. I can have my phone in the treatment area. I can place a call to anyone from anywhere. And communicating with clients is so different. Back in the days of the TTY, I was reading an output of the text of their conversation, but I had no idea about how they felt. Were they angry? Were they upset? What were they feeling at the time? But now with video relay services, I can see the interpretation of the client's comments. I can catch things a little bit earlier. I can deal with it. I can negotiate the conversation so much better. And it makes my job so much easier as a result. And I've got my cell phone. I can text someone. If they need to reach me, they can simply text me. I can have my phone anywhere in the area where I work. And all of the conversations can happen via text. So it's been an amazing thing to see those changes happen. They've all been great changes, and they make life easier. Honestly, the worst part about my experiences are not being deaf, it's being short. If you can imagine doing surgery on a cow, cows are big. The back end of the cow, where their back is about as tall as I am. And cows don't lay down for surgery, they stand for surgery. So there I am, right? Sometimes, you may not know this, but cows have 4 stomachs. And they have an occasion for one of their stomachs to sort of swing from side to side, and occasionally it gets a little bit hung up in there. And the procedure to fix that is to do a surgical incision on the side, pull that stomach down, stitch it into place, and hold it still. But I'm short, and I'm reaching into a big cow, trying to reach to the opposite end of the cow, and my arm isn't long enough. I've had instructors pull me out saying, "You can't do that, you can't touch the cow." And I say, "But I have to touch the cow, my arm's only so long, and I've got to get to the other end of the cow to get the stomach." And they pull me out and say, "You can't do that, it's not nice, you can't touch the cow that way. You can't put your head on the cow." I say, "Well, I can't get in the cow without putting my head on the cow because my arm's too short." And there I am trying to reach in the cow, and my head's bonking against the side of the cow's body. Poor cow, I think the cow must be wondering, what is happening back there? So really, the worst part of doing my veterinary procedures is working on large animals, being a very short, petite person.